They tell you the war ends. You sign some papers, they stamp them with a final, indifferent thud, you catch AC-130 and you're home. They don't tell you the war is a stowaway. It packs itself into the deep, dark cargo hold of your mind, a patient predator waiting for the quiet moments. For me, it wasn't the napalm or the rotor wash. It was the small things. The electric hum of a million unseen insects in the dark. The metallic snap of a Zippo lighter, friend or foe in a half-second delay. The phantom slickness of a leech on your ankle. And worst of all, the dead, ringing silence right before the world comes apart. Those are the ghosts that own the quiet. And for 50 years, my apartment has been their private chapel. My world shrank to those four walls and the single window overlooking the street. Dust motes danced in the slivers of afternoon sun, the only things moving with any grace. A soldier is an instrument of purpose. Take that away and you're just a rifle left in the rain, rusting from the inside out. My body still jolts awake before the sun, a phantom reveille hardwired into my nerves. I drink coffee that tasted like ash, sitting in the threadbare armchair, assuming my post at the window. A sentry guarding nothing. My eyes tracked the mailman like a scout, assessed kids on the corner for tactical formations, instincts hunting for a war that wasn't there. I watched the city stir, a ghost at the glass, viewing a life I'd forgotten how to touch. The quiet finally got too loud. It became a physical pressure in my ears, a weight on my chest that made each breath a conscious, tactical effort. Inhale, hold, exhale. I had to move. Had to put my boots on the ground and just march. No destination, no objective. Just forward. I started walking the neighborhood, a forced march through an urban jungle I no longer understood. I marched past tenements with paint peeling like sunburnt skin, flinching at kids' laughter that felt sharp enough to shatter glass. A car backfired down the street. I was halfway to the ground before I caught myself, heart hammering frantic Morse code, hands reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. I wasn't looking for anything. Just trying to outwalk the phantoms keeping perfect, silent pace at my heels. And then I saw it. It wasn't much. Just a forgotten slice of land wedged between two old buildings, a festering wound in the flank of the block. The chain-link fence was bent and sagging, its barbs of rust reminding me of old concertina wire after a mortar strike. The ground was a battlefield of neglect, a chaos of broken bottles glinting like shrapnel in the weak sun, the black husks of old tires half buried like forgotten landmines, and weeds that had fought a desperate, tangled campaign through cracked concrete. It was a perfect kill zone, a place you wouldn't want to get caught in an open field. The skeletal remains of a shopping cart lay on its side, wheels to the sky in a gesture of final surrender. A plastic bag caught on the wire fluttered like a tattered flag. The wind made a low, mournful sound as it passed through the fence, a sound I knew in my bones. It was a dead place, a piece of abandoned territory nobody wanted. No man's land. I stopped, stood there on the fractured pavement and just looked. The city noise, the traffic, the distant sirens, it all faded into a dull roar. All I could hear was that wind sighing through the wire. All I could smell was the damp rot and the sour breath of decay. It smelled like the jungle after a long rain. It looked exactly how I felt inside. Scarred, overgrown with useless things, fortified against nothing and for nothing and given up on. Most people saw urban blight. An eyesore. A problem for the city to ignore. But a soldier, he sees ground. He sees terrain. And terrain is never just dirt. It's something to be taken, to be held, to be fortified. I saw the broken down wall as a breach in the perimeter. The pile of tires was a ready-made barricade. The thickest patch of weeds offered cover and concealment. And right there, staring at that useless, trash-strewn lot, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a scared kid in a green uniform, clutching a rifle that felt too heavy for my arms. A flicker. A tiny spark in the cold, wet engine of my gut. The first stirrings of a new mission. I didn't know a thing about gardening. I knew about digging, sure. But I'd only ever dug to hide, to create a hole to disappear into. Never to grow. Still, an objective is an objective. You don't need the whole strategic plan to take the first step. You just need to know your objective. And mine was suddenly terrifyingly clear. I was going to take that ground. I was going to bring it back to life. It was a war on silence. A war on decay. A war on the ghosts. My war. And this time, the mission wasn't to destroy. It was to build. The first day, I reported for duty fully equipped. Long-handled shovel on my shoulder, heavy canvas bag at my hip, and a pair of thick leather gloves that felt stiff and foreign on my hands. You don't take a hill with a full battalion right off the bat. You start with reconnaissance, clearing a perimeter. My enemy was entrenched neglect. Its armaments were shattered glass, rusted cans, and the deep, sour smell of things left to die. The chain-link fence hummed its sad tune in the wind, a sound like a tripwire being pulled taut in the dark. I started with the glass, picking it up piece by jagged piece. The clink and rattle as I dropped it into a heavy canvas bag was the only sound for a long time, a lonely percussion against the city's drone. It was slow, meticulous, back-breaking work. But my spirit had been broken for years. This was different. This was an honest ache, a clean pain. Every piece of jagged green or brown I removed was one less thing that could cut something new trying to grow. One less scar on the earth. After a few hours they appeared. 3 of them. Kids, no older than 16, all sharp angles and restless energy, wearing their boredom like body armor. My training kicked in before my reason did. I noted their positions, their loose formation, the way their eyes scanned everything. Potential hostiles. Then the feeling passed, leaving a bitter taste. They were just boys. They leaned against the fence, a posture of practiced indifference I knew all too well. It was the same way you'd lean against a sandbag wall, trying to look like the shelling didn't bother you. They didn't say anything at first. Just watched. I could feel their eyes on me, sizing me up, scanning for weakness. I kept working. I've had more dangerous eyes on me. Then one of them spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet with a lazy confidence. "What you doin', old man?" I didn't look up. Maintain my rhythm. Bend, pick, drop. Click. "Clearing a field," I said. A laugh, sharp and short like a pistol crack. "Yo, old man. You know the city's just gonna dump more trash here next week, right?" His friends chuckled. It wasn't truly mean. It was just empty. The sound of boys who'd never been taught that hope was a useful tool. I finally straightened up, my back groaning in protest, and looked at them. They had that hard-bitten look you see in places the world has forgotten. The look of young sentries on a long, pointless watch. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself. "Something has to be done," I said. My voice was rough, like gravel rolling downhill. The first kid shrugged, a gesture of dismissal that was older than he was. "Waste of time. It'll be trashed again by next week. Always is." He was probably right. I'd taken hills we couldn't hold, seen good men die for a piece of ground we'd abandon a week later. But in the army you learn to hold your ground even if you know the enemy is coming back. You dig in. You fortify. You make your stand. They watched a little longer, then drifted away, their laughter fading down the block like a patrol moving on. I was alone again, but something had shifted. The silence wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the lot, to the neighborhood. And now there was a challenge echoing in it. I went back to work. By the time the sun started to dip, casting long, distorted shadows from the tenements, I had cleared a small patch. Maybe 4 feet by 4 feet. A tiny beachhead in a sea of filth. But for the first time I could see the soil. It was dark and packed hard, but it was earth. I drove the shovel into it. The sound wasn't the scrape of metal on concrete or the crunch of glass. It was a deep, satisfying thud. The sound of something solid. The sound of a beginning. That night, I slept for 3 straight hours before the ghosts came. A new record. That first conversation with the boy, Leo, didn't change the world. The next morning, the lot was still a field of junk and my shoulders still screamed in protest. For 3 days I worked alone. The scrape of the shovel, the heft of a discarded tire, the rhythm of reclamation. It was my own private cadence, a drumbeat against the silence. Some neighbors paused to watch for a moment before shaking their heads and moving on. I didn't expect to see him again. Kids like that, they're like hummingbirds. They dart in, all flash and noise, and then they're gone. You can't count on them. But on the 4th day he was back. Leaning against that same spot on the fence, arms crossed. No friends this time. Just him, watching me wrestle a tangled mess of old wire and rebar out of the ground. It was like an unexploded bomb, half buried and dangerous. He stood there for a long time. Long enough for the sun to move a handspan across the sky. I didn't say a word. In the jungle you learn to wait. You learn that the loudest thing in the world isn't an explosion, it's the silence right before one. The air grew thick with it, a physical thing between the old soldier and the young one. I expected another taunt, another challenge. I steeled myself for it. Finally he spoke. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the traffic noise. He just said, "That looks heavy." I stopped, leaned on my shovel and wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of a gritty glove. I looked at the tangle of metal, then at him. "It is," I said. "Things left to rust always are." He just nodded, his eyes fixed on the wire. Another long silence settled between us, different from before. This one wasn't empty, it was expectant. Then, with a sudden, decisive movement, he pushed himself off the fence and walked through the gap where a gate used to be. He didn't ask permission. He just walked over, grabbed one end of the rebar, his knuckles white, and looked at me. A silent question hung in the air. I nodded. I took the other end. We lifted together. On 3. 1, 2, 3. It was still heavy, a dead weight of twisted steel and forgotten purpose, but the weight was shared. The strain was halved. We hauled it to the pile of junk I'd been making by the curb, our feet stumbling on the uneven ground. We dropped it with a loud, discordant clang that echoed off the brick walls. For a moment, we just stood there, breathing a little hard, side by side, looking at the rusty tangle we had conquered. We hadn't cleared the whole lot, but we had moved one impossible thing. Together. He didn't leave. He looked at the dirt, then at his empty hands. I reached into my canvas bag and pulled out a folding entrenching tool. Old habits. You never go into the field without a spare. I tossed it to him. He caught it. And then there were two sounds. The steady, rhythmic scrape of my shovel, and the faster, more aggressive scrape of his, like he was angry at the dirt itself. It wasn't a perfect rhythm. His was a frantic assault. Mine was a steady siege. Youth and frustration against age and persistence. But it was a harmony of sorts. A duet against the decay. I didn't try to teach him. I didn't give him orders. A man has to find his own way with the soil. He has to learn its language himself. But I noticed his friends were back, watching from the sidewalk. They weren't laughing anymore. They were just watching. Watching one of their own dig in the dirt with some crazy old man. The war had taught me you can't win a battle alone. You need a platoon. You need someone watching your six. I didn't know if this boy was my platoon, but for the first time in 50 years, I wasn't alone on the battlefield. The ground beneath our feet felt a little more solid. A little less like a wasteland and a little more like a place worth fighting for.